Okay. Looks like we are officially live once again for the first time since UFC 279, everyone. And as you can see by the title of this live stream, this is basically going to be a recap of UFC 279. And before we get into it, as usual, I'll quickly check if everything's okay before we get started. Right, looks like we are set. And yeah, UFC 279 concluded over this past weekend. Obviously, lots and lots of pre-fight drama and lots of shenanigans heading into the pay-per-view. Lots of backstage brawls, lots of drama surrounding Khamzat Chimaev and Nate Diaz mostly. And right the day before the pay-per-view occurred, obviously we know that the fights and the entire main card sort of like took a turn, and we got new fights with Nate Diaz fighting Tony Ferguson in the main event and Khamzat Chimaev fighting Kevin Holland in a catchweight bout, whereas Li Jingliang fought Daniel Rodriguez in another catchweight bout. Originally, it was supposed to be Khamzat fighting Nate in the main event, Tony Ferguson versus Li Jingliang in the co-main event, and Daniel Rodriguez fighting Kevin Holland in the other featured welterweight bout. So yeah, we had Kamzat missed weight by 7.5 pounds, and Daniel Rodriguez also missed weight. He weighed it at 179 pounds, which eventually led to the cancellation of those fights. So, as you can see, judging by the title of this live stream, we'll be talking mostly about the Diaz brothers, and also I'll review the UFC 279 main event. And yeah, before getting into the Diaz brothers, I'll start off by talking about the main event between Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson. Uh, my first thought is that this is the fight like that should have happened a long time ago. To be honest, probably would have been best if this fight had taken place back in 2019, but obviously due to maybe unfortunate circumstances, the UFC couldn't book this fight, or I don't know what the deal was, but nonetheless, congratulations to Nate Diaz for that big win. And as we now know, this was his last UFC fight on his contract, and he did mention that there are chances of him coming back to the UFC. He's not shutting down the door on a potential return at some point. He did say that in his post-fight Octagon interview, but don't take Nate Diaz's words, because in the post-event press conference, Nate mentioned that he's never coming back to this organization ever again. So yeah, there you have it. Nate Diaz is officially done with the UFC, and with that being said, the Diaz brothers are also officially done with the UFC, and it is pretty much the end of an era now that the Diaz brothers are gone. And obviously, we saw Nick come back, and last year, after a 6-year absence from the sport, he fought Robbie Lawler at UFC 266. Lost to him via TKO. We'll get to that. We'll get to all of that. But yeah, starting off with UFC 279. First and foremost, Nate Diaz. He looked good, I would say, in his fight against Tony Ferguson. It was exactly as I thought it would be. Fighting a 38-year-old Tony Ferguson. Whereas if Nate had fought someone like Hamza Shimaev, it might have turned out really ugly for Nate Diaz, because honestly, the way Hamza Shimaev absolutely decimated Kevin Holland in that fight, he didn't give Holland a single opportunity to land a strike. He was absolutely relentless and from the start, and his mindset was to finish this fight as soon as he possibly can, and that's exactly what Khamzat Chimaev did against Kevin Holland. So I'm not sure if Nate Diaz would have even lasted one round against Khamzat Chimaev, despite all the talks of him potentially, maybe outlasting Khamzat for 3 rounds, and maybe when the fight went to the championship rounds, Nate could take advantage of Khamzat's cardio issues and etc. etc. But I don't think Khamzat would have allowed all of that to happen, because that fight against Kevin Holland, he looked absolutely relentless, and he just battered Holland from start to beginning. But anyway, getting back to the Nate Diaz fight, yeah, Nate looked good with his boxing. He has always been good with his boxing, but what surprised me the most is that he mentioned in his post-fight interview that he had a he his training camp was fully wrestling inspired. That was wrestling is mostly what he did in his training camp leading up to this fight because of course as we know originally he was scheduled to fight Khamzat Chimaev. So Nate was clearly preparing to, you know, outlast Khamzat in terms of his wrestling, in terms of his probably preparing as much as he could to prevent those takedowns maybe. But yeah, it was expected of Nate Diaz that he was going to prepare himself, you know, more on a wrestling basis, given the fact that he was fighting someone who is strong in that aspect. But the fact that Nate did so well in terms of his boxing was really another standout from this fight against Tony Ferguson. And I'm not sure what to make of Tony's performance, to be honest. Like, people are straight up criticizing Tony for saying that he didn't look good, he looked awful. To be honest, I don't think he sort of looked awful, Ferguson, that is. I think he looked quite decent, I'd say, because let's be honest, there were a few occasions where I felt that Tony might pull off the win because he was fucking up Nate's leg with those leg kicks, and maybe if a little bit more dedication or whatever it is, then maybe Tony could have pulled out the victory. Because honestly, Tony didn't look bad in that fight. You know, I have seen worse from Tony Ferguson in his last five losses. This definitely wasn't the worst performance I've seen from Tony Ferguson in his last five losses. I mean, people like to claim that he was fucking up Michael Chandler. He was looking good. He was looking like the old version of Tony Ferguson in that first round of that Michael Chandler fight. Honestly, no, man. Like, Tony Ferguson did a lot better in this Nate Diaz fight compared to that Michael Chandler fight, I would say. I mean, I know he did make a few mistakes, but that's how Tony Ferguson's attitude has been, you know, in recent times, in recent years since his loss to Justin Gaethje. And yeah, he Ferguson is mostly going out there to have fun these days. It looks like that is his style of fighting these days. He's just going out there looking to have fun, you know, not really putting too much pressure on himself, which is good. But because honestly, Tony doesn't have anything else to prove to the sport. He had an incredible 12 fight winning streak. So yeah, he doesn't really have to prove anything else to us. He can just go out there, and as long as he's there in the UFC, we can just have fun with his fights. And honestly, this was a really fun fight, especially given the fact that both men, you know, did a few shenanigans here and there in between rounds. You know, especially when Nate started walking off. I think it was the third round or maybe the second round. I think probably the third round. But yeah, anyway, Nate started walking off, and at one point, I did think that the referee was going to call off the fight because Nate simply started walking off, and Tony Ferguson, as we know, just laid down on the mat, classic Nate Diaz style. And yeah, that was really weird, bizarre, whatever it is. But yeah, getting back to Nate's performance, I would say that Nate did quite well with his boxing. His combinations were really good on the night. Obviously, this was the classic Nate Diaz fight you would expect because if you go back to his fight against Conor McGregor, the first fight that is, Connor was fucking up Nate's leg, similarly to what Tony did. Connor was doing brutal damage to Nate's legs with his leg kicks, and Nate was, you know, comprehensively taking those leg kicks. You know, he wasn't really phased by those leg kicks, to be honest, if that's how you want to put it. And it was pretty much the same here. You know, Tony was doing a lot of damage with those leg kicks, and at one point, I sort of felt that that might be the opening Tony might need to win this fight because he was doing so much damage to those legs. So yeah, I did think that at one point he might go on and, you know, get find that opening that he needed and get this win. But obviously, this was such a classic Nate Diaz performance. He let Tony Ferguson fuck up his legs, much like Conor McGregor did. Then he, you know, sort of invited Tony Ferguson to his range, which he did, and Ferguson perfectly fell for the trap, and Nate Diaz's jiu-jitsu did the trick. That is exactly how that is like the classic and the most Nate Diaz performance I've ever seen. Because if you go back to that first Conor McGregor fight, Nate Diaz sort of did something similar. He obviously used his jiu-jitsu eventually to get that win. He got, I would say, to an extent, he got fucked up by Conor in that first round of that first fight. And similarly, there were few moments here in this fight against Tony Ferguson where he got fucked up. But yeah, Nate Diaz maintained composure. His game plan played out perfectly, and he invited Tony to his range. Like I keep on mentioning, he invited Tony to his range, and eventually he got that guillotine choke, which got him the submission victory. I mean, classic Nate Diaz finish, to be honest. And yeah, now that Nate Diaz is done with the UFC, I mean, yeah, it's pretty much confirmed at this point that he's not coming back. Even though, like I said in the Octagon interview, post-fight Octagon interview, Nate said that he loves the UFC, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, he's not coming back. So yeah, with Nate being officially gone and with Nick officially done with the UFC as well, it's safe to say that the Diaz brothers' legacy and their era has finally ended in the UFC. I mean, as much as we all sort of praised Nate Diaz for beating the UFC system and how this plan of Dana White's plan sort of backfired against him. It's kind of sad to see Nate Diaz leave the UFC because he was one of, I mean, my personal favorites. I'm pretty sure a lot of other people obviously enjoyed Nate Diaz watching over the years. The older fans, or like the fans who have been watching, who have been following the UFC, from like for almost a decade now, have pretty much watched all of Nick Diaz's fights. So yeah, this pretty much is the end of an era. I mean, for Nate Diaz to be gone from the UFC is sort of unbelievable to me. But yeah, good for him, I guess. He's gonna make a shit ton of money outside the UFC. He said it in his post-fight Octagon interview that he's gonna show all these UFC fighters how to make money, you know, and take over another sport. That's something Conor McGregor tried doing with boxing. He made a good chunk of money fighting Floyd Mayweather. So yeah, maybe we'll see Nate versus maybe Jake Paul, maybe Anderson Silva. I don't know. Yeah, could you imagine if I just realized? Could you imagine if Nate Diaz for Anderson Silva? I mean, I'm pretty sure, considering Nick's history with Anderson Silva, maybe Nate still has sort of that animosity towards Anderson because it was after that fight against Silva that Diaz got that suspension. Nick got that suspension, and which eventually led to him taking a 6-year gap. And the fact that Nick even came back for one more fight in 2021 is just really shocking. So yeah, maybe we could see Nate Diaz versus Anderson Silva in the world of boxing. That is a big possibility now that I've realized that Nate Diaz could go on to, eventually box, and Anderson Silva is, of course, as we know, is fighting Jake Paul next. So yeah, sorry. Let's see. Do you have anyone joining the live stream? Anyone who wants to discuss about the Diaz brothers, maybe? I mean, it's truly the end of an era. I mean, it really hit me when Nate Diaz was making his walk at UFC 279. I was like, wow, man, this is actually the last time we're going to see a Diaz brother compete in the UFC. Then, I mean, that was really, really emotional at one point, to be honest, because never did I think that there would be a time that one of our, favorite fighters would be calling it a day. Because honestly, going back, yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot of Nate Diaz because I started watching MMA in 2015. So that was basically the time when Nate um, was starting to break out in the UFC, to be honest. Because honestly, the Diaz brothers were like never in each other's shadow, to be honest, because they never like sort of outlooked each other. They always supported each other. Nick, especially when he was active back in the day, he was like highly supportive of his younger brother, and So yeah, the fact that Nate is done with the UFC is like is hit me now. Like it's quite emotional, to be honest. But yeah, as I was saying, in 2015, it was after that win over Michael Johnson that Nate Diaz finally broke out in the UFC. He had that incredible post-fight octagon interview that caught everyone's attention when he called out Conor McGregor. I mean, if you go back or if you like had watched that octagon interview in real time, live, that is, so you probably realize how badass of a post-fight octagon interview that was. I mean, it instantly made me like a fan of Nate Diaz back then. And yeah, after that fight, obviously Nate went on to fight Conor McGregor. Definitely his biggest fight up until that point, at UFC 196. Nate goes on to submit Conor McGregor in the first round of their fight, and then he fights Conor in the rematch in 2016 as well, at UFC 202, loses to him via a majority decision, and then he takes off a 3 year absence from the UFC. And I think that's where things sort of got fucked up for Nate Diaz, because I think 2015-16 was like the peak or like the prime era of Nate Diaz. Like that's when he should have fought the most, I believe, because he was coming off a huge victory over Michael Johnson. Absolutely clinical performance against Michael Johnson. He looked quite sharp with his boxing against Johnson, and he of course looked incredible in that first fight against Conor McGregor. I mean, I know Conor had his moments in that fight, but yeah, Nate, of course, he did what he had to do and got that victory. So for him to like take 3 years off after that first win over Connor, after that two fights against Connor, was like the was sort of like he wasted those prime years, to be honest. And even after 2019, man, like he fought Jorge Masvidal, Nate Diaz, and then the UFC didn't give him a fight up until mid 2021 against Leon Edwards. So there you have it. I mean, I'm not surprised that like Nate left the UFC, because they just simply refused to book him in proper fights on a regular basis. That is, because Nate should have fought a lot more than that we saw in the last 6 years. I mean, he definitely should have fought a lot more in from 2016 to 2019, because for him to take 3 years off um, during the prime of his career was like it's not a good decision on behalf of the UFC. But yeah, this fight against Tony Ferguson, man, like this should have happened a long time ago, to be honest, because it would have been the best fight if this fight had happened in 2019. Because in 2019, Tony Ferguson was like, there's the last time we saw Tony Ferguson at his best in the UFC, and it was the last time we saw Ferguson actually win a fight in the UFC. As bad as sad that sounds, there's indeed the last time we saw Tony Ferguson get a victory in the UFC, and his fights against Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone, Cowboy Cerrone, in 2019 were just ridiculously good, man. That was like the peak and the most violent version of Tony Ferguson I had seen. And after that, of course, came along that fight against Justin Gaethje, where he ended up losing quite bad. So yeah, Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson, once again, it was a good fight. UFC 279. Honestly, there were a few moments where it's like I said, Tony, I just think he wants to fight for, just to have fun these days, just to enjoy himself, maybe, because that's what he loves, because fighting is what he loves doing. And as long as he's there in the UFC, as long as the UFC is willing to keep him under contract, maybe he's just hoping to go out there and have himself a good fight, because there were a few moments in that fight against Nate Diaz where Tony seemed a little casual, because he kept on doing that spinning thing. If you guys might have noticed, he kept on spinning around after one or two combinations, He kept on spinning around, and his corner was literally yelling at him to stop that spinning shit. His corner was literally urging him, keep, like, don't do that. Don't keep on turning your back on someone like Nate Diaz. And it would have been like really nice for if Nate had like sort of connected with the left hand while Tony was spinning. But yeah, for him to like not listen to his corner and that point sort of goes on to show you what version of Tony Ferguson we're getting these days. Nonetheless, eventually it was a great victory for Nate Diaz. I mean, the way he pulled off that guillotine was impressive. It sort of makes me wonder, like, was Khamzat Chimaev like, would Nate be able to pull off something like that if it was against Khamzat Chimaev? I mean, could you imagine like if they were scrapping in the corner while Nate's back was in the against the cage, and Nate somehow pulls off the guillotine choke against Kamzat while he was going for a takedown, maybe, or something like that, because that's how the guillotine. That's how he locked in the guillotine in the first place against Ferguson when Ferguson attempted a takedown and Nate sort of caught him out of nowhere, and that was it. So that sort of like makes me wonder, like, would he be able to do that against someone like Kamzat Shimaev? My initial response would be no, of course not, because I don't think Hamza Shimaev would sort of let Nate Diaz take his neck. But yeah, maybe, who knows? But yeah, eventually, man, congrats to Nate Diaz for like, not congrats, like kudos to him to for breaking this, for ending this UFC system. The way UFC tried to fuck him over in these last few days. They tried to bring bring all of Nate's fans over to Khamzat Shimaev, but yeah, Khamzat playing the bad guy obviously didn't help, and him missing weight of course didn't help either. So yeah, it sort of backfired for for Dana White and the plans that he had. But yeah, going forward, we shall see now what's up with Khamzat. I mean, obviously, his coach has come out and talked a lot, has been a lot more vocal about the weight issue. I mean, he said that Khamzat, ever since he contracted COVID and he had that huge battle against COVID, I think it was 2 years ago, or maybe it was early 2021, I'm not sure. But yeah, nonetheless, ever since he had that long battle against COVID, he has been apparently has struggled to cut down to 170. So his coach has been more vocal regarding this weight miss compared to Khamzat's behavior and his attitude during the fight week. But yeah, as it seems, there are chances of Khamzat possibly fighting at middleweight going forward, which obviously I'm not a fan of, because honestly, if you see, Khamzat Chimaev has come such a long way in the welterweight division. He's ranked at number 3, and I would honestly love to see him go out there and fight Colby Covington next, because that's obviously the fight that makes sense, and it's like I said in yesterday's video, like, I just want to see Khamzat Chimaev fight someone that is higher ranked, that is a top ranked fighter in his division, or whether it's the middleweight division. But yeah, for him to go out there and fight someone like Colby Covington, or maybe the loser of Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman, presumably he fights Kamaru Usman, that would also be a great fight. But yeah, I just want to see Khamzat Chimaev go out there and fight someone who is top ranked, someone who is going to be a threat to him, not guys like Kevin Holland. I mean, no disrespect to Kevin Holland, but come on, man. We all knew how that fight was going to end. We all know how Khamzat would have done against Nate Diaz. He would have decimated him, to be honest. And if Khamzat goes up to 185, yeah, maybe we could see him versus Paulo Costa, because all this gangster talk from Khamzat, you know, and for him to not fight someone who's bigger than him, that is Paulo Costa, would backfire, would definitely backfire on Khamzat, because he likes to call himself a gangster. So why not just fight the biggest middleweight that is out there? But yeah, let's continue on this Diaz brothers topic. Let's speak, rather let's talk about Nick Diaz going forward. I mean, who would have thought that Nick Diaz would have returned in 2021? I mean, definitely not me, because it is something I did not expect to watch a live Nick Diaz fight in the UFC, because I got into the UFC back in 2015, and my first event that I watched live was UFC 189, Chad Mendes versus Conor McGregor. I mean, back then the UFC did some crazy stuff. If you guys go back and watch UFC 189, if you see the entrances of Conor McGregor and Chad Mendes from that pay per view, you think that you're watching a WWE pay per view, because they had Sinead O'Connor come out and sing Conor McGregor's accompany Conor while he was making his entrance. Chad Mendes also had some other singer, doing the entrance for him, and it was like a proper big world title fight feel to it. There was a proper big world title fight to feel, even though it's like the interim belt. But yeah, I never had the opportunity to watch Nick Diaz fight live, because UFC 189 was the first time I got it. I watched a live UFC card, and it took place in July of 2015. And it was earlier in that year, in 2015 itself, that Diaz fought Anderson Silva, and he was suspended after that fight. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of crazy how Nick even came back to fighting 6 years later in 2021. I mean, I did not even think that this was possible for Nick Diaz to come back and fight in 2021 against Robbie Lawler, of all people, whom he fought back in 2004 at UFC 47. I think it was UFC 47. I'll just cross check it once. Mm, 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 mm. Where did it go? Was it UFC 47? Yeah, it was UFC 47 back in 2004 when Nick Diaz fought Robbie Lawler for the first time. Defeated him inside round number two via a knockout. And yeah, the fact that Nick even came back and fought Robbie Lawler, of all people, in a rematch that took place decades later, it's just so surprising. It's the last thing you'd expect from a Diaz brother. But yeah, I'm just so thankful, like, I got to see Nick Diaz fight at least once on live television. It was almost like watching, Brock Lesnar fight on live television, because back then, when I first got into the UFC, Brock Lesnar had obviously retired. He was back in WWE by that point, I believe. His last fight was in 2011 in the UFC, when he fought Alistair Overeem, lost to Alistair Overeem, two back-to-back losses. Cain Velasquez then lost to Alistair Overeem, and so yeah, it's pretty much like gave me the same vibe to it. Brock Lesnar was such a superstar. Nick Diaz was such a superstar. He had such an aura, you know, with himself, that he carried with himself. Nick Diaz was like a legend. He is a legend. I mean, the fact that I couldn't get to watch, guys like Nick Diaz and Brock Lesnar on live TV sort of like, didn't sit well with me. So yeah, the fact that Nick Diaz came back in 2021, competed in a fight that I got to watch live, was just insane. And of course, same goes with Brock. He came back in 2016, fought Mark Hunt. Obviously, the fight got overturned to a no contest, I believe, due to due to Brock failing a drug test or something like that. Yeah, whatever. But yeah, Nick Diaz coming back and fighting Robbie Lawler in 2021, and chaotic fight. That one took place at UFC 266. Obviously, I'm not gonna call it a good fight. It wasn't a bad fight either. I mean, if you look back upon it, it looks bad given how slow Nick looked in that fight. But I like to call it a more chaotic fight, because it was like Nick was swinging for the fences in that fight, and he connected a lot more than Robbie, I believe. But the fact that he like sort of sat there in the middle of the cage and like sort of gave up, it's just like classic Nick Diaz. But yeah, for Nick Diaz, man, like the way he came into the UFC, he had he carried a legacy with himself. Coming into the UFC, and was obviously a former WEC welterweight champion. He is also a former um, Strikeforce welterweight champion, of course. Yeah, I could have forgot that. Was also former Strikeforce welterweight champion and fought in so many memorable fights in Japan. Had so many memorable moments in Strikeforce as well, especially that brawl that he had in Nashville. So yeah, Nick Diaz was carrying a legacy when he came into the Excuse me, yeah, Nick Diaz was carrying a legacy when he came into the UFC, and Nate sort of like, he wasn't overshadowed, but he hadn't, you know, he didn't really break out compared to what his brother did. He didn't really break out as a star of his own back then. He was like just starting out in the promotion. But yeah, by 2015, Nate Diaz had obviously made a statement when he beat Michael Johnson, called out Conor McGregor, and yeah, rose to stardom pretty much with that victory over Conor. Up next, what's next for Nick Diaz? I mean, obviously he's not going to fight again. I don't think we'll like ever see Nick step back. Obviously not in an octagon, but maybe even inside a boxing ring. I don't think he's going to do that boxing crap, because by crap I mean what the former UFC fighters are doing. The likes of Tito Ortiz and all those fighters. So I don't think Nick is gonna step inside the world of boxing. Whereas Nate Diaz, we might see him fight. I keep on mentioning the Jake Paul fight because I think it's a very intriguing fight, that one. But yeah, UFC 217, and of course, let's talk about Tony Ferguson for a while. Five losses in a row for Tony Ferguson. Where does he go from there now? Because he's still ranked at number 15 in the welterweight division. And what's next for Tony Ferguson? I honestly have a feeling that he might be let go by the UFC unless he has like a few fights left on his contract. I'm not entirely sure what the status of his contract is, but I have a feeling that maybe this was the last time we've seen Tony Ferguson compete in the UFC as well. But yeah, I would like to see Tony get one more fight, because this fight was pretty much all about this fight week was pretty much all about Nate Diaz and how he is leaving the UFC. I mean, even when Anderson Silva left the UFC, he didn't get this reception. Trust me, he didn't get this reception because Nate Diaz is like such a cult hero, man. The Diaz brothers are like such cult heroes. So yeah, even like when Anderson Silva was leaving the UFC, he didn't get this reception. For Nate to like get this reception was just insane. I mean, he's not retiring, mind you. He's not retiring. He's just walking out of the UFC. He's just leaving the UFC. So yeah, I would like to see Tony Ferguson get one more fight. Definitely, like if that's going to be his last fight, should be a proper farewell slash send off fight for Tony Ferguson as well. He deserves that one at least, and should be at welterweight, I believe. And who knows, maybe he can get a victory. But yeah, for the Diaz brothers, man, it's truly the end of an era now, because they have been such polarizing figures in this sport. Both Nick and Nate. Nick, obviously, you know, I'm pretty sure the old school fans would have liked to see a lot more of him, given the fact that he was absent for 6 years in the from the UFC, and starting off from 2011 to 2015, he had like 4 fights in the promotion, like, and out of those 4 fights, he had just one victory. And if you calculate his last 5 fights, if you look back on his last 5 fights, he had just one victory. That was against BJ Penn at UFC 137. Whereas Nate has ended on a winning run, which is like quite impressive for him, because he was also on a losing skid, mind you. He had lost his last 2 fights against Leon Edwards and Jorge Masvidal. That Edwards fight, people keep on bringing up the that one moment that Nate Diaz had against Leon Edwards in that fight. They tend to overlook the fact that Nate pretty much got dominated in that fight by Leon. Hmm. Also, the Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal fight. I would have liked to see that the ending of that fight properly, because it was not a proper. We didn't really get a proper conclusion to that Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal fight. It ended in the third round via a very poor doctor stoppage, and I mean, Nate was just simply bleeding from that scar tissue, which he always did. Coincidentally enough, Nate Diaz did not bleed in his last UFC fight. That is so shocking. I mean, that's probably when we all realized that, yeah, Nate has this fight in the bag. The fact that he didn't bleed in that last fight against someone like Tony Ferguson was just insane. But yeah, I would have liked to see the ending, the proper conclusion to that Nate Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal fight back then, because I mean, I know that Masvidal was piecing Nate Diaz up throughout the first three rounds, but yeah, it's Nate Diaz, man. He can like pull off one good moment in those championship rounds, and that would be his highlight reel, and people would instantly talk about that instead of talking about the entire fight. That's exactly what happened against Leon Edwards. So yeah, I mean, people barely talk about Leon Edwards' good performance against Nate Diaz. They don't. They simply talk about, every time that fight is brought up, they talk about the one moment where Nate connected with that left hand, with that left hook, and he just pointed at Leon, which pretty much they overlook the fact that Nate got dominated by Edwards for entire 5 rounds. Let's see. What else can we talk about regarding the Diaz brothers? I'll obviously wanted to do a full proper breakdown video. Obviously, it would take me some time because I'd have to go back and watch that fight once again. But yeah, for now, I mean, this is my entire take. For someone like Nate Diaz, I have mentioned it before in this stream. Like, for someone like Nate Diaz who prepared himself, who underwent an entire wrestling-based camp, he did quite well, I think, in terms of his boxing, because Nate Diaz has always been a great boxer. He looked very good in terms of his combinations in that fight against Tony, man. Like, there were a few moments where Tony was just was not answering back. He couldn't answer back in terms of Nate's combinations, and yeah, Nate looked quite solid in terms of his boxing. What else? Am I missing something from that fight? I mean, yeah, it was the proper ending to Nate's UFC career. I mean, he beat the system, he got the victory, he said fuck you to the UFC, he trashed on the Rock's new sponsorship shoe line or whatever that is. Um, yeah, Nate Diaz had that proper last day on the job energy. But for him to go out with a victory, now we shall see what's next for him. Hmm. All right, let's see what else we have from UFC 279 that we could possibly discuss about. We've talked about Tony Ferguson. Like I said, I hope he gets at least one more fight. If the UFC are sort of planning to, cut him off from the roster, I do hope that he gets one more fight. And co-main event, Khamzat Chimaev, of course, fighting at 180 pounds against Kevin Holland. I mean, honestly, man, I still believe that Khamzat Chimaev should have fought Daniel Rodriguez, because honestly, that is the fight that made sense, because Rodriguez weighed in at 180 pounds as well. And it's like the perfect weight. But yeah, I just think that this was the UFC's perfect opportunity to, book Khamzat versus Kevin Holland and sort of capitalize on that, because these two had such bad blood for so many months now, for almost 2 years, to be honest, because it was 2 years ago when Holland was fighting at middleweight. He called out Khamzat saying that he was going to bang that boy up and all that crap. He's not going to bang that boy up. But yeah, I just feel bad for Kevin Holland, man. That's it. Like, he was like on such a good start. He had such a good start at welterweight. Like, he got those two big wins. He beat Tim Means, and Alex Oliveira. He beat both of them comprehensively, and he genuinely could have been a proper top contender in the welterweight division, considering the fact that you have the likes of, you know Wonderboy, Masvidal, who are like on the drop now. These guys used to be the top ranked fighters. Like Thompson, Wonderboy Thompson is sitting at number 7. Masvidal has gone down to number 9. Surprisingly, the guy, the fighter that I had my high hopes from, Vicente Luque, I thought that he was the dark horse of this division, is now sitting at number 10 in the welterweight division. So yeah, Kevin Holland, honestly, I thought that this was his opportunity. Like he could have easily broken into the top 10 of the welterweight division, if you ask me. But yeah, now it's not the case any longer because he suffered a loss. Even though it's at catchweight, I don't think that's how the UFC works because Daniel Rodriguez is now somehow ranked at number 14, even though his fight was at catchweight, and Li Jingliang is not ranked anymore. That's just sad, man. Li Jingliang had risked literally everything. That man literally risked everything. He had no right taking that fight against Daniel Rodriguez, but he, just for the sake of the fans, just for the sake of saving this card, Li Jingliang took that fight, and of course, we all saw what happened, how he got robbed. So yeah, I just feel bad for Kevin Holland. I think he should have like fought Li Jingliang, and that way either Lee or either Kevin Holland could have stayed ranked in the welterweight division, or Kevin Holland could have broken into the rankings rather. It's like a loss-loss situation for both of them. But yeah, now in the welterweight division, of course, you have the likes of Bilal Muhammad, who's still in the mix. Jeff Neal is in the mix, but I don't think he's gonna go that far, considering the likes of Shafkat Rakhmonov and Sean Brady are right behind him. So yeah, you'd probably expect the UFC to book Jeff Neal against someone like Rakhmonov maybe, because Rakhmonov is is someone who I have big hopes from. He is very underrated and very overlooked by a lot of fans, I believe, because he has a lot of potential. But yeah, who knows? Don't worry, we'll continue on the Diaz brothers topic. I'm just trying to mix it up a little. This stream is mostly going to be around the Diaz brothers. All right. It would be nice, like if we had gotten Nate and Nick, on the same card, sharing the same card. I don't think it ever happened in the UFC. Not sure. I'm pretty convinced it never happened. Yeah, it would have been nice if we at least got Nate and Nick share the card, at least one pay-per-view together. It would have been really nice. Like this was the perfect opportunity. Like UFC 266 was like the perfect opportunity. You had Nick coming back after 6 years, his last fight. uh, I mean, I'm not sure what else Dana White expected of him, other than the fact that this was going to be his last fight. And of course, like Nate also fought in 2021 against Leon Edwards, and he in fact fought 3 pay-per-views ago at UFC 263. So yeah, that would have been like the perfect opportunity to like sort of put Nate and Nick on the same card. Would have been really historic. Nate and Nick on the main Nate Diaz, excuse me, Nate Diaz and Leon Edwards in the main event, and maybe Nick and Robbie Lawler in the co-main event. 5 rounds, both fights that were originally both fights were of course originally scheduled for 5 rounds. So yeah, it would have been really nice to see both of them compete on the same card. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing Nick sort of accompany um, Nate if he goes on to if he switches over to boxing, because it's always like good and like heartwarming to see Nick standing by his younger brother, supporting him throughout his journey. And that's what I said, like these two guys were like never overshadowing each other. They were like always supported each other. That's the one thing, like one of the most iconic brotherly duos in sports history, not just combat sports history, in just sports history, the Diaz brothers, I would say. It would have been nice if we had a few people on the chat, because this is a topic where I could like ask you guys, what was your favorite moment of Nate Diaz? What was your favorite moment of Nick Diaz? Etc. Etc. Blah blah blah. But yeah, most clinical Nate Diaz performance I have ever seen. I don't know. I've definitely not watched a lot of his earlier, previous and earlier fights from his. Oh, there we go, man. We have Hussein in the chat. What's up, my brother? We're just talking about. I was just talking about the Diaz brothers. How are you doing, Hussein? Yeah, as I was saying, like it would have been like obviously hadn't watched a lot of Nate Diaz's earlier fights, but if I had to like pick one of his best performances that I had seen, I'd probably say I'm sort of intrigued, man. I do want to say the Anthony Pettis fight because he looked so good in that fight. And there's also the Conor McGregor fight, the first fight, the Michael Johnson fight as well. Nate looked very good in that Michael Johnson fight. I'm great, man. What is this? Is like discussion video about UFC 2? Yeah, pretty much like a review of UFC 279 and mostly about the Diaz brothers. Now that they are both officially done with the UFC, I feel like this was like the perfect opportunity to discuss their legacy in the UFC because Nick has pretty much confirmed that he's not coming back. Excuse me, Nate has pretty much confirmed that he's not coming back. Nick is obviously retired. So I think this is like the perfect opportunity to discuss the Diaz brothers. But yeah, I'm also talking a little bit about the UFC 279, mostly about the three fights, the three big fights from the main card. For Nick Diaz, Nick Diaz looked really good against KJ Noons back at Strikeforce. The second, as a rematch when he defended the Strikeforce Welterweight Championship. That was like one of my favorite Nick Diaz performances. In the UFC, it's bizarre. I mean, I don't know, man. In the UFC, I'll have to rewatch those fights again. I mean, I've watched his performance against BJ Penn. That was really impressive. I think it was the Carlos Condit fight where he got dominated by Condit. And, I have to go back and watch the GSP fight. These were the fights that I've watched a long time ago when I was just starting, when I was just started watching the UFC. Because by that point, Nick had already been done fighting in the promotion. Hussein, if you're still there, what's your favorite Nate Diaz fight? And what's your favorite Nick Diaz fight? Well, to start off with the whole thing, I have to say UFC 270 was a very unique experience. I've never seen a messed up, exciting pay-per-view. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Like, this is the, like, I did not really expect the UFC to change the pay-per-view card, the main card, in literally a day ago, literally a day before the pay-per-view, actual pay-per-view. I mean, this was like a turn of events. This was like a roller coaster ride. Absolutely crazy stuff, man. Historic. I mean, I think Dana White was pretty desperate to keep Nate on the card, so that's why he just went ahead and gave him the fight against Tony Ferguson. I love Nick's performance against Paul Daly and Robbie Lawler Strike Force. They were insane. Yep, yep, yep. The Paul Daly fight, right, right. I almost forgot about that one. That's a good performance. The first Robbie Lawler fight was insane, man. Nick was like a beast back then. Didn't Nick like sort of didn't Nick like have more significant strikes compared to Lawler in their second fight, even though he looked slow as a tortoise? Favorite Nick Diaz fight is definitely against Paul Daly. Yep, almost forgot about that one. Favorite Nate Diaz fight is the second fight between Nate and Connor. Yep, that was a good one. Nate Diaz, that second fight against Connor. I mean, arguable. People keep on saying that Nate could have won, but I think Connor won that in my books 3 rounds to two. I think he got 3 rounds. You know, he won 3 rounds in that fight. But yeah, could have gone either way. I think my favorite Nate Diaz performance, in terms of his, in terms of technical performances, I would definitely say the Michael Johnson one. To be honest, because he looked so good in that fight. It was his comeback fight as well. Like after a gap of a year, he was coming back, coming on the back of a loss to RDA in 2014, and then he came back and looked so good against Michael Johnson. But yeah, for just for the sake of having a bigger name, I would say Nate Diaz versus Anthony Pettis. Maybe even Conor McGregor the first fight because that was obviously Nate's biggest victory of his career. Has to be. It's just crazy how Nate and Nick like have been so relevant over these years, man. Even though they never won a UFC championship, especially Nate. Nate has been like so fucking relevant in the UFC. He never won a title. The closest he came to was challenging for the lightweight championship against Benson Henderson that he lost comprehensively, I believe. And yeah, look at the contrasting paths Benson Henderson and Nate Diaz have been on. No disrespect once again to Benson Henderson. He's a good fighter. He's a legend of the game. But just look at the contrasting paths. I mean, that's how Nate Diaz's stock is is that high. Would have been nice if we actually got a pay per view featuring both of these guys, Nate and Nick. Would have been really nice. Let's see what we have in the news. Who could Li Jingliang fight next? That's I'm really intrigued to see who the UFC will put him against next. I mean, I hope that they do a proper rematch between him and Daniel Rodriguez at welterweight, not at catchweight, and hopefully Lee can you know get his win, get his rightful victory in the rematch. Daniel Rodriguez also offered him the rematch, I believe. So yeah, maybe they could possibly do the rematch next. Maybe Li Jingliang could regain his ranking in the welterweight division. He's now fallen out of the rankings somehow for a catchweight bout, and that is just so ridiculous to me. Let's see what else do we have. Obviously we have UFC fight night Corey Sandhagen versus Song Yadong this weekend. Another great matchup at bantamweight. Obviously the bantamweights, as we all know, always deliver. So yeah, I'll be looking forward to that fight card. We'll do a proper breakdown of that as well, proper prediction video of that as well, and I'll do a watch along of that as well. After that, it's just a string of you know weak UFC cards until UFC 280. Following Song Yadong versus Corey Sandhagen, we have Mackenzie Dern versus Yan Xiaonan. Not really a strong card that one. We have Cody Garbrandt in the co-main event of that one, and Nothing else to look forward to. Then we have Alexa Grasso, Vivian Araujo in the next fight night event. Jared Cannonier is fighting Sean Strickland in that card. And then we have the big one, the UFC 280, of course, Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev, and of course, Aljamain Sterling, TJ Dillashaw, and Peter Yan fighting Sean O'Malley. I mean, that is a fight that I'm so much looking forward to. I mean, this is probably going to be a weird take, but this is probably the closest we'll ever come to see dominant fighter fight someone who is, you know, not that big of a threat in the division. And it's almost along the lines of Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz, because Nate was obviously never a threat to Khamzat Chimaev. And if you ask anyone, Sean O'Malley is not a threat to Peter Yan at all. Peter Yan has good grappling, he has good wrestling, his striking is just ridiculously good, his boxing is ridiculously good. Sean O'Malley, I don't know how he'll prepare for the takedowns. I don't know how he will keep up with the relentless striking pressure from Peter Yan. So we shall see how that fight turns out. Is the stream lagging? I hope it's not lagging. Nah, it looks fine. All right, let's continue. Let's continue for a while, then we'll end the stream, and then I'll return later tonight for the Champions League games that, of course, we have in a few hours for one of the watch alongs. All right, let's see what else we have in the news. Anything related to UFC 279? You are perfectly fine. I'll hopefully do a fun related video, a fun video, not fun video, what am I saying? A fun video focusing on Nate Diaz possibly fighting Anderson Silva in boxing, because we know Anderson Silva is fighting Jake Paul next. Nate Diaz could switch over to boxing. He has hinted it, and I think he will. He's like the hottest free agent out there right now. So you can expect the shit ton of money Nate Diaz will make, in the world of boxing. And given the history between Anderson Silva and Nate's older brother Nick, it'll be really, really interesting if somehow Silva goes on to beat Jake Paul and we get that is Nate versus Anderson Silva in the world of boxing, that is, mind you. I mean, it's just crazy how people literally didn't give a people didn't really care when Anderson Silva left the UFC 2 years ago. It was literally a week after Khabib had retired that Anderson Silva had his last UFC fight. But now you look at it, the the reception Nate Diaz has gotten in his last fight in the UFC. I mean, it's just insane. We also have Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler coming up at UFC 282. Another fight that has been confirmed recently. Why is my stream lagging? Wait a minute. All right, I think we're fine. All right, let's see. Daniel Cormier says Tony Ferguson at his peak was as good as anybody, but his decline has been very steep. Couldn't have agreed more. There are some issues with the stream. I can see it is lagging, but I'm not entirely sure. I can see my connection is fine, so I don't know where the issue is. All right. All right. Let's continue. Let's continue for some more time. Then we'll end this. Never mind. Let's get back to that Daniel Cormier thing. So Daniel Cormier says that Tony Ferguson's decline has been steep. The most discouraging thing about it is Tony Ferguson's decline. It's sad because for so long he was so good in a weight division where it was hard to become the champion. So he only held a portion of the belt by becoming the interim champion. But Tony Ferguson at his peak was as good as somebody in the UFC, but his decline now has been very steep and it hasn't been gradual. It was very fast how he kind of fell off a cliff. I mean, it's sad. It's sad watching Tony Ferguson's demise. If is that the right term? Yeah, him going downhill basically. It's just sad, man. I mean, it definitely has a lot more than just him cutting weight for twice before that fight against Justin Gaethje. Because honestly, after that loss to Justin Gaethje, I think Ferguson's confidence took a hit because he was coming off like 12 to 13 big wins, like a 13 fight win streak or like a 12 fight win streak in the UFC, and for him to finally lose in the UFC in such fashion, obviously that sort of took a hit on his confidence, and I think that's one of the reasons why Tony hasn't looked good in recent years. So yeah, it definitely has a lot more to do than just him, like just him cutting weight twice. But yeah, like I said, man, I just hope Tony Ferguson gets his flowers, gets his perfect send off fight in the UFC. As for the Diaz brothers, I mean, what a journey, man! What a ride for them. Two of the absolute legends of this combat sports world, and you could pretty much call them the cult heroes of our generation of the and yeah, it's going to be sad not seeing them around in the UFC. I mean, pretty much has been a tradition. The Diaz brothers not sticking around in the UFC, even though while they were under contract. But yeah, two absolute legends of this game. Hopefully, we'll see more of them in the combat sports world outside of the UFC. And right, we have a question from Hussein. Jared versus Sean and Jan versus O'Malley are the most intriguing matches, in my opinion. What are your predictions for that? Jared Cannonier, I think he's getting it done against Sean Strickland. I was about to say Sean O'Malley against Sean Strickland because it's pretty much going to be a fight Strickland will try to where Strickland will try to sort of stand and trade with Jared Cannonier, but I think Cannonier obviously has better striking. He's more of a he's got more volume punching, if that's the right term, I guess. But yeah, what I mean is like Jared Cannonier, I think, is a better striker compared to Sean Strickland. I mean, Strickland obviously hasn't looked good in his last few fights. I mean, obviously the last fight he got knocked out, but the fights before that, prior to that, I remember him in his last two victories before Alex Pereira. Yeah, when he fought Jack Hermanson and Uriah Hall, he didn't look good in those fights, those 5 round fights. I mean, he just stood in the middle of the octagon, not willing to trade as much as he claimed he would leading up to those fights. So yeah, I could see like Jared Cannonier sort of outstriking Sean Strickland and sailing to a decision victory. Should be easy. Should be sort of similar to what we have seen from someone like Robert Whitaker in recent years, in his recent fights, because Robert Whitaker has sort of outstruck his most of his opponents, and he has sort of sailed to victory, to decision victory. It's pretty much what we saw in his last fight at UFC Paris against Marvin Vittori. It is exactly the way we all expected that fight would turn out. And I'm sort of expecting a similar performance from Jared Cannonier here. I'm like expecting him to completely outstrike Sean Strickland and yeah, sail to a decision victory. Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley. Yeah, Peter Yan versus Sean O'Malley. Peter Yan all the way. I just don't think Sean O'Malley is gonna knock him out. Peter Yan hasn't been knocked out ever. I think in the UFC. Definitely not in the UFC. I'm not sure about his resume prior to the UFC, but I don't think he's been knocked out. He's like at best his only loss was probably to Aljamain Sterling. Like the second fight I'm talking about, he's lost twice in the UFC to Aljamain Sterling, and yeah, that's it. No other losses. Never been knocked out. Never lost via a TKO. Never been finished. And the only time he lost in outside of the UFC was against Magomedov, who I believe is currently competing in Bellator, isn't he? Yup, he's currently competing in Bellator. Magomedov. Yeah, so the only time outside of the UFC Peter Yan lost was against Magomedov. That was also via a split decision. Yeah, Jared's striking is superior, but I think his main advantage over Strickland are his size and strength. Jared has KOs at heavyweight, and Sean Chin is finding as middleweight. Uh, he can break exactly like Jared Cannonier has just some crazy power in his hands, man. Those hands, man. Like he is one of the most hardest hitting middleweights out there. It's a shame. Like we call him one of the hardest hitting middleweights. We are all aware of what Jared Cannonier has in terms of power, in terms of strength, and then you have Israel Adesanya fighting in that fashion and sort of neutralizing Jared Cannonier's striking. I mean, it's obviously not the most fashionable way is to do so. I mean, Izzy did what he had to do, but yeah, obviously people expected a lot more from Izzy from those Izzy fights, and eventually, I think it turned out quite similar to how Izzy versus Yoel Romero was. I mean, not that disappointing, but yeah. What are your predictions about Jake versus Anderson? Man, that is a fight that I have no idea, man. Like, I don't know. Anderson Silva looks good. That's all I can tell you. Anderson Silva looked good against in his last fight, Chavez Jr. I think it was Anderson Silva. Let's just quickly Google Anderson Silva. I'm pretty sure it was against Chavez Jr. Let's see. Let's see. Yep. No. Oh, excuse me. 40 to Ortiz. in that last fight. Excuse me, my bad. Yeah, he looked. I mean, come on, you don't really want to count the Tito Ortiz fight. It ended in the first round. Yeah, but the Chavez Jr. fight is what I'm relying on here. Obviously, Anderson Silva looked really good throughout those 8 rounds, and Jake Paul. I'm not. The only thing that makes me want to believe that Jake Paul is not going to get the victory here is Anderson Silva's head movement. His head movement is still quite superior to a lot of other fighters and younger fighters than him. Anderson Silva has tremendous head movement, and somehow Jake Paul somehow doesn't manage to hit Silva like he wants to, and Anderson Silva keeps on, irritating Jake Paul with his head movement. Maybe we could see him getting knocked out. Not, like all I'm saying is Anderson Silva has very good head movement. He still does. But yeah, you throw in the added factor that Jake Paul hasn't exactly fought high level boxers like Silva yet. I mean, Tyron Woodley isn't a high level boxer. He definitely wasn't. I mean, if Jake Paul had beaten excuse me, what's his name, Tommy Fury in his last fight, then I would have said that okay, Jake Paul has what it takes to beat Anderson Silva. But now I'm not sure. I mean, he's looked good in his fights, but he's not fought someone like Anderson Silva. Tyron Woodley doesn't have the same head movement attributes like Anderson Silva does. So yeah, Tyron Woodley has the power, but come on, Tyron Woodley's chin gave up on him a long time ago. Honestly, I think Jared Cannonier is overrated not because of his performance against City, but look what Rob did to him. I wouldn't call him overrated, but I would rather call Jared Cannonier a gatekeeper of the middleweight division, something like we've seen Derek Brunson do in recent years. Jared Cannonier is more like a gatekeeper in the middleweight division, and unfortunately, I hope Robert Whitaker doesn't go down that path because he has struggled against Izzy twice. Struggled by struggle, I mean he's lost to him twice. So hopefully, he doesn't turn out to be someone who beats the contenders in the division and then goes on to lose to the champion. That is Robert Whitaker I'm talking about. Jared Cannonier is probably like the gatekeeper of the middleweight division now. I'd say he's replaced Derek Brunson in that 185-pound division. But yeah, hopefully Izzy will get pushed to his limits by someone like Alex Pereira because Pereira has great striking. I mean, he's huge, that guy. So hopefully we can see him bring the best out of Izzy because I mean it's been such a while since we've seen one of those striking masterclass performances from Izzy. It's been quite some time now. Don't get me wrong, Izzy has been good. I wouldn't call it great. I would say good. Izzy has looked good in his last few fights. He looked good against Marvin Vittori in the rematch. Did well in terms of his takedown defense, and that's when I realized in that fight that Izzy's takedown defense had improved so much. And yeah, there you have it. Hopefully, he gets pushed to his limits by Alex Pereira. I really don't want Jake Paul to win at all, honestly. I feel he's disrespecting the whole combat sport, but he has that KO power and don't want to see Anderson's KO power. Exactly, man. That is the exact reason why I don't want to see Jake Paul win this fight. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't really want to simply hate on Jake Paul because he's taking lame fights and all that stuff. Because it's just, I'm over that. I'm over that bullshit now. I'm over that Jake Paul bullshit because at the end of the day, I think he's like an independent fighter. So yeah, he's not contracted to anyone. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think Jake Paul is like an independent fighter. He can go there, pretty much fight anyone and make that fighter a millionaire. And it would really suck to see Jake Paul get a victory over a legend like Anderson Silva because Anderson is like such a nice guy. He's been like so many people's. He's like so many people have grown up watching Anderson Silva fight in the UFC, and he's like such a role model of the combat sports world. So yeah, it really sucked to watch Anderson Silva get knocked out by a YouTuber. Imagine if Izzy wins. from Pereira the same way he has been winning, man. That would suck. That would be so bad if Izzy somehow, you know, bores us to a snooze fest and beats Pereira the same way he beat Marvin Vittori, the same way he beat Robert Whitaker, the same way he beat Jared Cannonier. I mean, his last three fights were against top names, and somehow none of them are memorable fights. So yeah, I'm hoping for a new champion. By the way, I'm hoping that Pereira gets the win here. Nothing against Izzy, I like him, but yeah, it'd be so nice to see Pereira win that fight because he's like such a soft-spoken guy. He doesn't he hasn't bragged about the fact that he has got two victories over Izzy ever since he came into the UFC. He hasn't been like all talk, he hasn't been going out there in post-fight octagon interviews and saying, "I'm gonna kill everybody," if that rings a bell. Yes, I'm talking about Khamzat Chimaev. But yeah, Pereira hasn't been, like the loud, cocky contender who's on the rise. Good for him. He's staying humble. He's gotten himself a title shot. Let's see what he can do. Hopefully, we'll see a new middleweight champion. But yeah, it's kind of weird, right, for someone like Khamzat Chimaev to go out there and say that I'll kill everybody, and then he fights who? He fights Kevin Holland by having a weight advantage over him. It is what it is. I'm not hating on Khamzat, but yeah, I just want to see him fight a top name. That's it. I mean, I know he fought Gilbert Burns, he beat him, but yeah, let's see how Khamzat does in a 5 round fight against maybe a Colby Covington, maybe against a potential Kamaru Usman, if Usman somehow fails to beat Leon Edwards in the rematch. Usman versus Khamzat is like still an intriguing fight to me. I'd really like to see that, especially if it's like a title eliminator fight. Let's before ending the stream, I just let's see what else we have coming up in the UFC. The fights to look forward to. Of course, next weekend, rather this weekend, we have Song Yadong and Corey Sandhagen. Big fight, that one. Obviously, big fight feel to it. And let's see. I still don't know who Sodiq Yusuf is going to fight. Gil Chikadze pulled out of the co-main event of that card from this weekend's card. And they still haven't announced a replacement. Andre Fili versus Bill Algeo is in a featherweight bout on the same card. That should be a really fun fight. I want to see Khamzat fight Paulo Costa. Exactly, man. Like Paulo has a huge size advantage over Khamzat, and I really want to see if Khamzat is like willing to take that fight or if he's just all talk. Because Paulo is more like a natural light heavyweight to me. I think he fits perfectly in the 205-pound division. But yeah, for his final fight in the UFC, if he doesn't renew his contract, Paulo Costa, that is, I'd like to see him fight Khamzat. That would be a really fun fight. Because Costa has become such a likable guy now after all the shenanigans he did leading up to that Marvin Vittori fight. He was pretty much like what Khamzat Chimaev did, right? But yeah, at least Paulo had the balls to come out and say that he was not going to make weight. Yeah, even though later on he was bragging about it, he was like being a douchebag. Exactly. Paulo Costa is the perfect kryptonite against a guy like Khamzat. His takedown defense is solid. He's super strong and obviously a way better striker. Plus, he's a BJJ black belt. Agree. I agree. Definitely in terms of power. Very explosive striker. Probably has big advantage over Khamzat in terms of striking. So Khamzat has to be careful. Like Khamzat cannot go all Gilbert Burns mode if he decides to fight Paulo Costa because he was all He was reckless in that fight against Gilbert, and he almost paid the price for it. But yeah, our next big fight card is of course UFC 280. We have lots and lots of exciting fights on that card. Start to finish, man. Lots of Russians on that card. Magomed Mustafaev um, is on that card. Zubera Tukhagov, of course, if you guys remember that Conor McGregor Khabib brawl, Zubera is fighting on that card. Nikita Krylov is there, fighting on that card, of course. Uzbekistan's Mahmoud Muradov is fighting on that card as well. And then we have a big welterweight bout as well. I think it's the prelims main event. Bilal Muhammad versus Sean Brady. Man, come on. The UFC is really going to put Caitlin Chukagian in another main card over Bilal Muhammad versus Sean Brady. But yeah, the big one that I'm really looking forward to is Benil Dariush versus Mateusz Gamrot from UFC 280. Imagine the build up between Kamzat and Costa will be hilarious. Man, Paulo Costa is fucking hilarious. I mean, if you could just go back and watch his interview from the MMA yesterday, he was like, I laughed my ass off watching that interview. He's like so hilarious, that guy. And his memes on Twitter, man, so equally funny. Let's see what are the fights that have been announced for UFC 281 so far. I think it's just one fight. All right, no. Oh, excuse me. Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler is happening at UFC 281 and not UFC 282. All right, my bad. I thought it was set for UFC 282. Yeah, Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira, main event of UFC 281. You have Carla Esparza defending the strawweight title against Zhang Wei Li. Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler should be a banger. Dustin Poirier, of course, coming out and bitching about Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson on Twitter after their fight ended. He was saying that this was the bum Olympics. Obviously, it sounded like he was a little bit bitter because he didn't get that Nate Diaz fight. Is what it is. Dan Hooker is fighting on that card. Renato Moicano is fighting Brad Riddle. Oh my god, that should be a banger of a fight. But yeah, Dominic Reyes returns against Ryan Spann at UFC 281. Carlos Ulberg on that same card as CZ once again. All right, so I think we'll keep this live stream till this much. We must talked about a lot of things, a lot of topics covered. Diaz brothers, of course, the main focal point of this topic. I would love to make a video about them sometime down the road in the near future. Obviously, like I mentioned, the potential Nate Diaz versus Anderson Silva fight could happen in boxing. I'll make a video about that at some point. And Hussein, my brother, thanks for joining once again. Thanks for coming in with the questions. And before ending this live stream, I'd like to dedicate this live stream to Elias Theodoru, who passed away unfortunately at 34 years old due to colon cancer. I mean, obviously, I know it's not much, but it's the least I can do. Being someone who has been following this sport for quite some time, it's the least I can do is dedicate this live stream to him. So yeah, may he rest in peace. And as for you guys, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed UFC 279. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed Nate Diaz's final fight in the UFC. I'll see you guys in the next video, next live stream, and of course, Song Yadong versus Corey Sandhagen is this weekend. Should be another fun UFC card, and I will be back in a few hours for the UEFA Champions League games for tonight with the watch along and the live discussion of the games. And the watch along will be for Bayern Munich versus Barcelona. But yeah, that's it for this MMA related live stream. That's it for this UFC 279 live stream. For anyone who's tuned in, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.